Greetings, loyal listeners and new recruits. I'm Drew Deach.
And I'm Dani Ryan.
And this is Genre Vision. Every week on Genre Vision, we review and recommend horror films, action movies, fantasy flicks, sci-fi cinema, and more. And this week, we're getting down and dirty with Robert Rodriguez's Frank Miller's Sin City. And as you might have already guessed, my usual co-host, Travis Newton, is not with us this week. Instead, we have Dani Ryan stepping in. Hi, Dani.
Hey, guys. I'm super excited to be on for this one because I'm a Sin City nerd.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about this. But just to clarify, everything's fine with Travis. He's just visiting with family for his birthday. So everybody wish Travis a happy birthday. I know right now with everything that's going on in the world, might have scared some people, but he's absolutely fine. He is having a great time, so we wish him the best, and he'll be back next week with us. But yeah, let's jump right in. Sin City. I definitely think that I was just looking this up before we started recording. I didn't realize that this is actually the 15th anniversary of Sin City this year, and it's amazing to think that we're 15 years removed from it, because I remember when it was being advertised, and
now I feel old as fuck. That's my graduation year, so
right. I remember when it was being advertised and everything, being so awestruck and excited, because it felt like such a statement of what we can do with comic book adaptations as far as leaning on their visual inspirations is changing. We're going to be able to do something where we can replicate the actual art style of a comic book in a way that you've never seen before. And Sin City was a movie I was absolutely crazy about when it came out. I was not familiar with the Dark Horse comics at the time. Once it started advertising, I scooped them all up as quickly as I could at my local comic shops. And like I said, I loved Sin City when it first came out. I bought it on the big special edition DVD that they put out. And I rewatched it a couple of years ago. I can't remember how long, and still felt pretty good about it. This most recent rewatch for the show, I think, was the least I've liked the movie in a long time, but I still like it. And Dani, since you introduced yourself as a Sin City freak, I'm interested to know how 2005 Dani appreciating Sin City feels from 2020 Dani appreciating Sin City.
I still definitely appreciate it. I will say my appreciation for it's different. I don't sort of just love it as blindly and buy into it as much, because there's information in particular that's come out since that sort of changes how I think about the film, and just, things have changed. It's been 15 years, but I still really, really enjoyed myself, and I think it's a movie that is so unique and is so accurate to the comic. Like, it's such a direct translation in a way pretty much nothing else is. Like, I've never seen another comic book movie do it this close. Maybe 300, which is also a Frank Miller flick, so that's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because this Robert Rodriguez, who directed it, he was very adamant about having Frank Miller, who wrote and did the art for all of the original comics. He was very adamant about having him as a co-director, having him on set, having him be an integral part of the entire filmmaking process from start to finish. So much so that this is the film that caused Rodriguez to leave the Directors Guild of America over crediting, because the whole deal with the DGA is if you want to be in have a DGA approved film, you can't have two directors credited. And Rodriguez was like, no, I absolutely want Frank credited as a co-director for this movie. This is his vision. And that was certainly a big part of the kind of marketing around the movie, as far as in, news stories and stuff, that it was sacrificing something to ensure a specific vision got in front of audiences. And that's the thing, regardless of my feelings or your feelings or anybody's feelings about Sin City, I really don't think there's an argument to say that this is there is no way this isn't Frank Miller's Sin City.
Oh, it's 100% Frank Miller's Sin City, which really is the thing that is kind of my problem with it now. Because Frank Miller has turned out to be a real garbage human. And so some of the things in Sin City that, felt just sort of like, oh, this is homage or pastiche or whatever. Now I'm kind of like, oh no, this is his fantasy. Ew.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly an aspect of the movie that has colored it for me in some respects. But at the same time, even upon this rewatch, I'm able to see this as, yes, this is turning certain two-fisted, pulpy crime stories into superhero stories. And that's very clearly what Miller wanted to do with the comics and what Rodriguez wanted to bring over from the comics into the film, as well as playing with very over-the-top ideas about noir film imagery and classic black and white crime film imagery. I mean, that was certainly a big selling point of the movie, was like it's primarily in black and white, but there are going to be parts or pieces of the image that will be in color. And I remember Frank Miller on the commentary track talking about Rodriguez's choices and when to use color, and how he said Robert chooses to use color as a weapon at times where it will have a specific impact. And I think for the most case, I like a lot of the decisions in when to accent certain things with color and when to keep it black and white.
Yeah, like 95% of the decisions completely work. They make sense. It's not like, why is that in color? So I would, well, and it is the stuff that was in color in the comic book too. Like, that's the one thing to remember is like, you can sit down with the comic, the graphic novel on your lap and read along with the film. And it's basically shot by shot, the same exact thing with a couple of tiny exceptions, mostly related to Bruce Willis's nudity. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we should say that this is an anthology film set in a singular world, and with connections between characters and such. And as an anthology film, I think it suffers what all anthology films suffer from, is that some stories you're going to prefer more than the others. I think that the way that it was sectioned off in the movie by having one story kind of open the movie with a tone, basically, the customer's always right, with Josh Hartnett. This is the mission statement. This is what you can expect for the next 2 hours. This is the movie we're going to deliver you. And knowing that that was essentially a test film that Rodriguez shot, because this is one of his kind of infamous, made in his green screen garage movies, that opening is pretty much just a test film, I think is impressive in terms of saying, this is the exact vision I want to bring to the screen. No compromises, nothing like that. That opening pre-credits sequence is one of my favorite things in the entire movie.
Oh, the Josh Hartnett bit is so... Well, that's what they used to sell the idea. So, I mean, it was a short film originally, so it's this own little self-connected thing that explains kind of to us what world we're in. I mean, you know exactly, as soon as that credit comes up and that music starts, you're like, okay, I know exactly what kind of ride I'm here for.
Well, I definitely want to mention the music. I had the soundtrack for Sin City. I think maybe before it had even released, possibly they had already released the soundtrack. And man, the music for this movie, I think, and it should be said that it's got 3 credited people on the music: John Debney, Graham Revell, who's a very prolific composer, and Robert Rodriguez himself. The music does so much to really sell me on the mood of this entire piece. Obviously, that seems kind of crazy considering the extreme visual choices that are going on in the movie. But I think the music, especially on this most recent watch, I was like, this might be the best singular element of the film as far as doing this whole neo-noir two-fisted thing, but bringing it to a kind of modern pop sense.
Like, the biggest thing for me, one of my first notes is I forgot how bombastic this score is. Because that opening, like, it is so in your face. It's this, I mean, it's like, it's really, really intense. And it stays really pretty intense throughout the film, but it all has its roots in those noir films of the 40s, 50s. And so because of that, it just feels like the perfect, like you said, it's updated. It's the perfect completion. And it all goes together perfectly. Like, this is one of those movies that is just trying to do an aesthetic, and it nails it 100%.
I'd mostly agree with that. But moving on, we then get into the anthology. And it's very clear, I think, not only from the movie standpoint, but from Frank Miller's standpoint, that his first story that he wrote for Sin City, The Hard Goodbye, it's interesting. This really is, to me, all I would ever need of Sin City. It's like it captures exactly what Miller wants to do. Whether at this point I agree with it or not, it's perfect. And I should state that even before that, we get part of the Bruce Willis story, which was originally, the arc was called That Yellow Bastard. And it's interesting, on the DVD release, they gave you the option where you could watch all of the stories individually as if they were the collected comics. And That Yellow Bastard is actually the one story that I think benefits from the way it's structured in the movie, by having this kind of prologue opening almost to the story and setting it up as just that. That's just, maybe that's all we're going to see of Bruce Willis, is he's this old detective with a heart condition that's breaking the rules to go save this little girl from a psychomaniac with a rich father, and he's going to die. And he has this little line, like, an old man dies, a little girl lives, fair trade, fade out, start next story. I like that structuring a lot.
I love it, especially because a bunch of time passes in between as far as his story goes. So
Right.
It really works in sort of selling that idea, like, oh, a whole bunch of time has passed, because you've got to go, wait, hold on, I got to think back to the beginning of this movie, this other part. We're coming back to that. And so I think that sells it. And I also do think, out of the three stories, That Yellow Bastard is the weakest. And so having that split really kind of helps it for me.
Okay, that'll be interesting to talk about in a little bit. But yes, I think that split really helps. And like you said, the fact that there will eventually be a gap of 8 years kind of helps again set, it's like, well, I guess this is what was happening in between those 8 years, were these other little stories. But then we jump into The Hard Goodbye with Marv and his one night with the goddess Goldie. and then waking up and finding she's dead, and him going on his big revenge mission. This is, like I said earlier, this is pretty much the concept, the mood, the tone, the goal of Sin City distilled into one perfect story.
I would agree with that. I definitely think Hard Goodbye is the strongest of the three. It's the one that's the most cohesive vision and has the most interesting characters. It's the best one.
I think it also has probably the standout performance of the movie, which is Mickey Rourke as Marv.
Oh, he's just absolutely incredible. My dad hated Mickey Rourke for some weird reason before this movie came out. So I didn't tell him Mickey Rourke was in it, because I was like, maybe with the makeup he won't be able to tell. And afterwards he's like, that movie was amazing. I actually liked Mickey Rourke. What the hell?
Well, I again, from the DVD commentary, Frank Miller talked about when they were doing casting and they had Mickey Rourke come in and read for Marv the first time. And Frank Miller said, I wrote down one note and just, he is Marv. And it's like, yeah, he nails the voice, the tone, the makeup, as exaggerated as it is.
It works.
It still works. Like, yeah, it really works for me and cuts that very specific silhouette that you see in Miller's artwork. It's great. And the simplicity of the story just being, okay, I'm just going to find out who killed this prostitute, and I'm going to do the usual knocking heads. It's just a big cavalcade of scenes of Marv beating people up and being this pulp fiction Superman.
Yeah, and the entire, like, everybody else, like, besides Marv, is also knocking it out of the park. Like, you've got some of the gnarliest, scariest villains in this. I mean, Elijah Wood's Kevin, come on. Oh my God. Ugh.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's certainly something to talk about, is that Sin City has an incredibly stacked cast. I mean, that was certainly, again, one of the selling points at the time was, wow, all these people are in it. And, you know, there was definitely sort of we're getting all of these very notable talents to just come hang out and make a movie in my backyard feel, to the point where Tarantino is credited as a guest director for one scene, to where it's like, yeah, we're just going to have Quentin show up for a day and shoot a scene because whatever, we're making a movie, let's have fun. I think that spirit mostly translates into the movie. There's one performance that we'll get to that on this recent watch I was not as crazy about. But
does he have the same first and last name initial?
No, but we can talk about that. The Hard Goodbye, like I said, I think it just really nails when you hear the title Sin City and you see the poster and you see what it's going for. I just think The Hard Goodbye nails all of that so perfectly, and to the point where it's like, yeah, it's doing all of these weird noir ideas, but it's also pulpy, and at the same time it's cartoonish horror.
Yeah. I mean, everything is. The violence in this is cartoonishly horrific to just, I mean, a ridiculous point. Like, there's one line in the second story, it's, you know, she didn't quite decapitate him. She made a Pez dispenser out of him. And I'm like, that description alone is horror. That's, ugh.
Yeah, I like the horror stuff. And so when we have a horror character like Elijah Wood as Kevin, who you know, yeah, he just has to cut a mean visage, which he does. It's funny though, I do know that there's a shot of Kevin, I think it's the first time we see him in silhouette and we actually get a look at his actual face, is that he's been digitally manipulated, so like his features are actually more sunken into the center of his face and his outer features have been widened. So he has a weird, like, that Will Smith tiny face meme.
Oh yeah, it is wild looking.
I mean, it's all covered in shadow and stuff, so you got to really be looking for it. But all of those really striking visual choices, like to film a character in pure black silhouette and then just have like Kevin's glasses be these just pure white circles in the frame. It's still incredibly striking imagery to me.
Oh, there was a sequence where Marv goes to see his Carla Gugino, his parole officer, and you know, he's talking to her and he needs some drugs and he needs her to help tape him up because he's gotten in this brawl. And there's a shot where it's from the side, it's same as the comic panel, and it's his silhouette, and then the bandages are in white. And then throughout the rest, I was like, oh, well, they'll keep that for a second, then they'll kind of fade it out. But no, they really, those white bandages stay just blocks of white. And I think that those kind of stylistic choices are what makes this something that really still is visually interesting, when we can do things that are more technically impressive now, but they don't really have the vision of something like this.
Right. That's why in 2005, this really gave me the promise of we're potentially entering a new arena with comic book cinema in terms of being able to do things in an art style sense that we couldn't do before. And unfortunately, I think Sin City is something of an outlier, and it was certainly successful, but seeing where comic book adaptation has gone, it's clear that these are kind of once in a while movies, and they have to be so distinct and strong and clear in what their vision is. Otherwise, people really won't jive to it. And that was even the case with the Sin City sequel, obviously, not only because it came so many years late that people were kind of over it, is by the time it came out, the visual tricks that it was doing already felt like, well, we've seen this before, and that's not really that striking anymore. But for me, the original film still has those moments. So some highlights in the hard goodbye. Pretty much everything that comes out of Mickey Rourke's mouth is gold. And he nails the black humor of Marv really well.
Oh, he kills it. His line delivery of "Is that all you got?" Like, just he absolutely kills the pitch black humor.
I mean, my favorite one is him driving a car and dragging a guy's face on the ground and just going, "I don't know about you, but I'm having a ball." Like that line never ceases to make, to crack me up.
Or just the whole like, "Oh, I like your coat," and I'm just like, "Oh, well, he's dead."
That's one damn fine coat you're wearing. Well, and when that becomes a running gag every time he says it, you're like, I'm enjoying this. So yeah, I think the hard goodbye just knocks it out of the park. And on this rewatch, when it was done, I was like, I think I'm done. Like that's all the Sin City I need. But then we move into the second story, which was the big fat kill.
Yay.
And yeah, I'm interested to talk about this because upon rewatch, this was my least favorite segment of the movie.
It was always my favorite of the graphic novels, so that may color my opinion because I did read them first. I read them when this movie was like, before it was really hyped up, it was just sort of announced, and I had a friend who was super into the comics, and she's like, "Well, now you have to read them." And so I was like, okay. So I went out and I got them, and I got the ones that were going to be the movie because I was like, okay, well, I'll get these and shut her up. And then I was like, oh, great, now I have to buy all of these.
Yeah, I went through the same thing. And the big fat kill upon rewatch, again, I think the majority of the talent is knocking out of the park. I can't believe I'm saying this, but in a movie where Carla Gugino, who is the queen of vamp style and is just absolutely excellent in everything I've ever seen her in, I think the female actress that steals the show is Brittany Murphy.
Oh, absolutely. I'm totally with you. Her performance is so perfect. It's so spot on. She is so tapping into that archetype of sort of the down on her luck waitress with a heart of gold. Like, she's tough, but she's still vulnerable. Like, she knocks it out of the park. Her accent, her line delivery, just everything.
I was going to say specifically her voice acting talent comes into play here because I think even maybe more so than Mickey Rourke, she nails this specific cartoon idea of what we think of when we think of certain types of noir and detective, grimy, gritty detective stuff. Even if that wasn't really a thing, that's what kind of our collective nostalgia about this certain subgenre is. She taps into that so perfectly that every line she says is just a joy. And specifically the way she delivers it is just an absolute joy. Benicio del Toro is in a movie with a lot of great villains. He's in contention for my favorite villain.
Yeah, he's so slimy, and the way he delivers his lines, again, like he's doing about a 50% of the Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas character in there. Like, there's definitely some of that same, like, I'm crazy, man, and I'm like, I'm here for that.
There's some of that, and I like his big bloated makeup that they put on him.
Oh, he's just so gross.
Yeah, I love him as Jackie Boy, and obviously Rosario Dawson is just an absolute queen. And everything.
Oh, she's great. Clive Owen this is my favorite Clive Owen role, and that's hard to say for me because I absolutely worship at the altar of Children of Men, but I think his Dwight is just perfect.
So this is where we can disagree. He was my least favorite performance this time around.
Oh.
I think because he's clearly going for a very specific kind of deadpan delivery that is present in some of the other performances, but I think he is the one that deadpans it the most. Sometimes,
except for Michael Madsen, who deadpans it to the point that I'm like, "Are you asleep?"
Well, Michael Madsen, I think, is doing it to such a comical extreme that maybe he's not aware of. But with Clive Owen, sometimes that deadpan works. Like a line that I love to quote in my everyday life when something goes wrong is his delivery of, and everything was going so well. Like, like there's times when that delivery really works, but when he has to be a little more impassioned, it never quite clicked for me. And sometimes when he's just, I don't know, it gets dangerous. There's a part of me that wants to believe that he's sort of channeling Harrison Ford
in Blade Runner.
In Blade Runner. There's a part where it's like, yeah, and I know that voiceover is contentious among fans.
Cold fish.
Yeah. So, but yeah. And Dwight is actually kind of the least interesting character as far as the leads are concerned in all the stories for me.
In the movie, yeah. If you don't have the comics to give you the background story and you don't understand that, like, because the whole second movie is basically, you know, the big story of the second movie is Dwight and it's, you know, butts, but.
Yes, yeah, no, obviously the big fat kill comes after a story that had already happened in the comics and they make mention where it's like, you know, Dwight showed up with a brand new face. He's this much more mysterious character than any of the other leads. And I think Owen's playing to that, but yeah. I don't know, that there's a disconnect. At least there was for this watch for me.
Yeah, for me, he really taps into that sort of indifferent cool guy hero thing. I feel like he totally nails that Harrison Ford indifference, that Han Solo / Blade Runner, you know, and well, he did it's the exact same performance that he gave in Shoot 'Em Up. I'm not gonna lie. Like, it is the same kind of performance, just with a little bit less of a wink and a nod. This was slightly more straight-faced.
Shoot 'Em Up, he's more acerbic. Like, his whole character's thing is like, I'm gonna rant about some, you know, pedantic little thing.
That's true.
Whereas Dwight in this has to just be, you know, he's cold, he's calculating, he's cool, but I think sometimes to a detriment.
Maybe it's just because he's so hot to me. I don't know. Like, that,
so that
could be.
You've got those blinders on.
Yeah, like, I mean, this movie is one giant bisexual thirst trap. Like, holy crap, him and Rosario Dawson making out. I'm done.
I won't disagree with that appraisal of the movie. I will say though that I like the setup of, okay, we've accidentally killed this hero cop and we have to dispose of his body or there'll be this big gang war. And the special guest directed scene where Quentin Tarantino has Clive Owen and Benicio del Toro in the car speaking to each other is like that was one of those scenes that in as a high school theater kid, I was like, I want to do this. And they're like, you can't do that. Like, you absolutely cannot do that. So
it's so good because Benicio, you know, his head rolls back and you can see his throat cut open. And when he talks, he gurgles. I
mean, I love, he's another one, like pretty much any delivery Benicio del Toro gives me, he's just like, got you smoking there, eh, bud? Like, just, it's funny. Like, it's really
great.
Really, really funny.
Well, and it's cool because, like, the other thing too, with the one other thing I really like with Big Fat Kill is that both, you know, the first story and the third story, there's women, but they're reliant on men, like, almost completely. And in Big Fat Kill, the women actually kind of bail the dude out. And yeah, I mean, so that is refreshing, and I feel like that, for whatever reason, the prostitutes running their own place and, like, wanting to keep the mob out, wanting to keep pimps out, like, that all resonated with me a little bit more because I wasn't able to latch onto any of the, like, turbo masculine characters.
That's fair. I think even so, I am not going to open up the can of worms that are Frank Miller's depictions of women. Because even in the Big Fat Kill, there's certainly some questionable characters.
Well, there's some, I mean, the only thing with Big Fat Kill that bothers me is, like, a couple of the characters have some, like, racist paraphernalia for no reason, and you're just like, why is that ninja star a swastika? What is the purpose of this? It's never explained. Stuff like that I'm a little bit more put off by than the sexuality of it, because the sexuality, I feel, was so inherent to the pulp stuff. And in the comic books, all the dudes are full frontal naked too. So he did not spare anybody. So that part of it doesn't bother me as much for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, and as far as the Big Fat Kill goes, it's more so Alexis Bledel's character of Becky who I think her performance is good, but again, it's just this other, it's another little pixie girl. That's like Miller gets all, he's like, all right, I'll have my tough Valkyrie woman and I'll have my goddess woman.
None of it is like with women in mind at all. This is a purely male, masculine, straight guy fantasy. And if you kind of understand that going in, I don't necessarily have issue with it.
I think as long as you see the literal comic extreme that it's taken to,
right?
I mean, that's part of the whole thing with 300 is like people don't see the comic extreme that the masculinity in that is taken to.
Oh yeah, people are like, yeah, this movie's so cool, and I'm like, dude, it is homoerotic to a point of ridiculousness. Like you have no idea, and they're just like, they take it at face value. And
I think that's the same thing that happens with Sin City. But the good thing is about Sin City is I can't see people not seeing the comedy of all this. It's so blatantly over the top in every aspect.
Well, I remember seeing it in theaters back in 2005 because I saw this, I think, 3 or 4 times in theaters. And I remember every single viewing, the whole audience was cracking up a lot. Like people really did tap into the humor of this. And, I'm when I watch it primarily now, other than, the visual aesthetics and things like that, it's to get a good giggle. It's because it's fun and it's funny and it's definitely, it's almost like an unintentional satire of itself.
Maybe. I mean, I definitely think there is an element of that present in the material. It's obviously Miller was trying to make what he felt was the most distilled version of this particular subgenre. And in doing that, you made a cartoon, and that's okay. That's not a dismissive term. It's just, that's what it came across as. So when we move into the third story, That Yellow Bastard, which picks up from the opening with Bruce Willis, I will say, I think Bruce Willis,
he's good.
Probably. I think he's good. This is definitely one of his he's caring movies.
Yeah, he actually is paying, like he cares enough to put in a performance. Like it's not a phoned in situation. In fact, on my last rewatch, my husband even leaned over and he goes, "Oh yeah, I forgot Bruce Willis actually gave a shit in this one."
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely movies after a certain point in Willis's career where you can see he's either tapped into it or he's just working. And this is one where he's tapped into. I think he nails the voiceover idea the best. He's not the most entertaining at it, like Mickey Rourke is with Marv.
No, but I care.
Yeah, I think he nails the best emotionality. I think he nails the tone of everything that it's going for. And as far as trying to replicate this specific archetype in a way that's genuine, I think Hartigan is the best character for that. Oh,
absolutely. In terms of a way where you actually feel like this could possibly be a real person and it's someone that you like connect to, I think Hartigan nails that. Like his character, if portrayed the wrong way, could be really creepy. And instead he's not. He's sympathetic.
Right. He is the most sympathetic lead that we get, in that he is framed for these horrible crimes that he was trying to prevent because of people in power and stuff like that. My other favorite villain performance in this movie is Powers Booth, who just decimates the few.
Oh, Powers Booth is great, and you reminded me, actually, we did forget that Mr. Mickey Rourke, or not Mickey Rourke, Rutger Hauer. We cannot forget that Rutger Hauer is in this mofo.
He is. I think, unfortunately, upon this rewatch, Rutger Hauer is mostly saddled with just doling out exposition, bow tying.
Yeah, but it's Rutger Hauer, and I'll watch him in anything doing anything. So,
but he does get a great moment in which he says, like, "Okay, Marv is going to kill me." He's like, "Will that give you satisfaction, my son? Killing a helpless old fart." and what's great is Miller was, like when they were making this movie, they were very much about like, you're going to stick to the script because these are Frank's words. I want to do Frank's words.
Mm-hmm.
And Rutger Hauer was an infamous improviser.
Oh yeah.
And writer himself. And Frank Miller said on the commentary, he's like, yeah, when Rutger came in, he was improving a lot of lines and we had to cut a lot of stuff because it was like, that's just not working. But he's like, but the one improvisation addition that he made was to that line. It was originally killing a helpless old man. And he's like, changing it to helpless old fart was so much better.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, it's great.
It's
a great,
perfect.
And him, I think also he improvised the grabbing Kevin's head and kissing it and saying, we're going home.
Which is so creepy. Like,
yeah,
Rutger
I
Hauer
love
was
all the
OG,
horror
man.
stuff. Yeah, Rutger Hauer is great. But getting back to That Yellow Bastard, Powers Booth, little appearance with his weird contacts in and his big bushy mustache and his delivery of the line, like, you blew his nuts off, you blew his pecker off. Like it's just so wonderful.
One is he blew his pecker off. Like it's almost like it's just so ridiculous that it really is. It's almost self-parodying.
Yeah, just I'm doing you hard again, and I'm doing you good.
Like these feel like things in a John Waters directed movie. Like if you weren't, if you just had your eyes closed, you'd be like, oh man, oh geez.
Well, yeah, I mean, how can you not giggle at a line like I'm doing you hard again and I'm doing you good? Like it's just so ham-fisted in the best of ways. And what's great is that everybody in the cast gets it. And no, that's why I think I took exception to Clive Owen on this watch, is like, I don't know, he's just, the coldness isn't jiving with everybody else who just seems to be having a relentless ball with every line they get to ooze out of their mouth.
I feel like he's, I don't know, for whatever reason, like he's the straight man to me, and the fact that he, just changed his face and he's trying to stay on the DL and just all of that sort of worked in his favor to me, almost to like a Randall Flagg, he's so normal that your eyes pass over him kind of thing.
Yeah, but so we get this Hardigan bit where he's getting framed for these crimes and he's not going to confess for them and he's going to stick it out for 8 years in prison, and then eventually he's let out because he confesses and because he's going to try and save Nancy Callahan, who was the little girl he saved in the opening of the movie. We're going to talk about Nancy in a little bit, but first I want to talk about the most surreal thing in the entire movie, which is That Yellow Bastard.
Yeah, Nick Stahl in that wacky makeup.
I have a weird soft spot for Nick Stahl, I think, between...
Oh, he's great. I just, the makeup, his doesn't hold as well as Rourke's Marv makeup does. Like, there's things where now I'm kind of like, yeah, now we're in Dick Tracy territory, and I don't think it works.
Well, yeah, that's certainly present in the comic. That's why I say it's the most surreal thing. And with no, we're explaining it's like, okay, he's Rourke's son and they did experiments on him to basically keep him alive. And that turned him into this yellow bastard who also, I love the fact that every time they mention is that he smells and he stinks.
Yeah.
I love that little piece.
And it's from the page too, which is one of those things that I'm just like, this is so great because it really translates beyond imagery.
His first appearance you could mistake as a dream because Hardigan's in his jail cell and he fades up and he wakes up and before we even see him, we hear the voiceover say, "This guy stinks," and then cut to just this weird yellow Smurf man.
I always thought he looked like a Smurf mixed with a Ferengi.
Yeah, that's actually a really good fusion. That it's so bizarre to me, and I think this is the thing is, if you've been with the movie at this point, I think you'll buy into whatever weird visual stuff it wants to do. So when this guy shows up, you're already on the train.
Yeah, you're like, fuck it, yes, I'm bought in.
I love Nick Stahl from Carnival, and even recently when I rewatched Terminator 3, I really liked him. And in this, I just think he's got a great voice. He's got to be somebody who's buried under makeup and performs through the makeup, which I think he's able to do. And a lot of that has to do with his vocal performance.
Oh, his vocal performance is great. I think that it is absolutely just, it's super creepy. Like, he really nails sort of the creepiness and the desperation of this character, who's a pedophile, and that's why he is the way he is now, because, Bruce Willis wrecked his day, which is good.
Yeah, took away his weapons, both of them. So Hartigan confesses and is released, and so he can go out and find Nancy because he thinks they're going to hunt her down and kill her. So the one big visual decision I don't like in Sin City is there is this bar, Katie's bar, and it's the one really big set that they built for the movie because every character at some point is in this bar.
Yeah, it's the one location that ties them together.
Yes, and the decision is when you enter this bar that everything gets this weird kind of semi-brown sepia tone.
I hate it.
Yeah, it's really ugly.
Yeah, it's really bad, and it makes all of the colors, or not the colors, but all of the shades of gray and black sort of blend together. Like, it makes everything just look muddy. And not just because it's, it's a little bit brown. It really messes with the clarity of the picture, and it's just ugly.
Yeah, like I said, it's the one visual decision that I understand the impetus behind it to give. It's like, okay, this is this one place that everything kind of comes together and everything. But I think because they're shooting on, this digital format at the time and everything, the change over to that I don't think it looked good at the time. And I think 15 years later, it's actually made it look worse.
I would agree. I would certainly agree. Although I do want to point out that I think most of the CG in this works. Like, most of the digital trickery, it works because it's so stylized and it's not trying to be realism, that it still looks pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, when you have these clear, obvious big CG cars, flying off
but
of
they're so fun.
Well, right. I mean, they have basically no real world physical weight to them or anything. And that's fine because, again, it all comes across in the style of the movie. Characters do things and move in the frame in certain ways that are physically impossible. I mean, from the very get-go, Marv is blowing doors away by punching them. It's the physics of this movie act on their own, and that translates to the fully digital stuff, which, like you said, because it's so strongly stylized, I think still stands up. So That Yellow Bastard is really all about Hartigan reuniting with Nancy and trying to protect her from the evil Rourke boy, who is now that yellow bastard, capturing her again and murdering her. So let me be straight here. The other weak link, I think, in this cast is Jessica Alba.
She's not great. It's kind of a bummer because I loved her when I was younger, which I think was primarily because I loved the character of Nancy. When I was younger, and as an adult, I look at Nancy and I'm just like, you sweet summer child, what are you doing?
Well, there's
some stuff that, like, her and Hartigan, like, their romance worked for me when I was, 20, but when I'm, in my 30s, I'm like, ew.
Yeah, it's very, it wants to have its cake and eat it too by having Hartigan refuse her and all this, but having her just be overly just, you're the only man I'll ever love, and all of this really gross stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of like the Indiana Jones relationship, Raiders of the Lost Ark, where you're just like, wait a second, how old are you? Like,
So yeah, that's a problem in the material itself. It's compounded upon by I just don't think Alba.
She plays it little girl cute the whole time, and it does not work, which is really a bummer given how, like, I thought she was really good on the show Dark Angel. Again, this could be one of those I think they're hot and so my brain doesn't work situations. But in Sin City, I feel like she's just really doing the cute, innocent little girl thing to an almost gross degree.
Yeah, she's just a pair of pigtails away from feeling illegal. It's unfortunate because I don't think Jessica Alba as an actress is bad. I just think that the role itself is kind of a thankless one, and also at the same time, the direction that she was given was only compounded those problems. But I think there's some really great stuff in this final stretch of the Yellow Bastard stuff. The movie doesn't do it enough, but I like when it does the full white silhouettes of characters.
Oh, I love the full silhouettes. Like, because again, they're straight from the comic. They're one of those things that it's so, if you have read the comic book, that it just instantly clicks into your brain. Like, oh man, I've seen this. That recognition is instantly there when it's the silhouettes. It's
just
cool.
like the comic books, it was an interesting way of turning what's essentially negative space into actual space, like a negative white frame of a human being becomes a physical human being. And that's a really cool, seemingly simple effect, but far harder, I think, to pull off than it appears. But I will agree. I think that Yellow Bastard, with the exception of the Nick Stahl stuff and Bruce Willis's performance, it's also on the weaker side for me. And maybe that's why upon this rewatch, this was the least I liked Sin City, because for the first time, the majority of the anthology stories as anthology stories didn't stack up for me.
Yeah, I was completely invested in Big Fat Kill and Hard Goodbye. I still was totally into both of those, and especially with Big Fat Kill, just the women in it. I just love all of the different female characters, from Rosario Dawson's Gale to Miho. I mean, I have a huge print of Miho from the comics that I usually keep up on my wall, like framed with mirror nunchucks and stuff on it, or ninja stars. But it's really cool characters, and so that still works for me, even if little parts of it don't. It works as a whole. But yeah, for whatever reason, that Yellow Bastard, other than little bitty bits of it where I'm just kind of like, oh yeah, that's a good performance choice by Bruce Willis, or like, oh, that's a really cool shot. Pretty much the only part is when I like is when he beats that Yellow Bastard's head in, and he's just punching wet bone, and I was like, okay, all right, this is cool. I'm still here for this.
Yeah, I mean, the moment of him ripping off his genitals is still incredibly funny to me.
It's so great.
Well, all the K&B stuff, all the K&B effects are phenomenal in the film, the makeup and everything. I'll say, starting to wrap up, I still think Sin City is a seminal and important film, and one that I wish there had been better fallout from in terms of comic adaptations. Because this is something I would like to see more in comic book cinema, is an attempt to replicate certain art styles in filmmaking. And I think after so many things like Ang Lee's Hulk or Frank Miller's follow-up to this, The Spirit, and things like that.
Speaking of weird Nazi shit. Yeah,
that's a whole nother ball of wax. Or something like the Wachowski's Speed Racer, which I think is a masterpiece.
Oh, it's so cool.
Like that is an avenue that I would like to see explored more.
Or even like rotoscoping. Like I think of
sure.
What's the Philip K. Dick one? Scanner Darkly. Like I think of a Scanner Darkly, and I think of the things they were able to do because of the rotoscoping, and I'm like, that could work for certain comic book properties. There's things that you could do with that would make it less intensive in terms of trying to make it look real, and it's going to age better.
Yeah, well, it depends, obviously, because of the digital technology available at the time, what they were shooting on as far as the quality. This was mastered in 1080p, so
yeah, there is no 8K version of Sin City, and there never will be.
Right, exactly.
It's like 28 days later you buy it on Blu-ray and then you are severely disappointed.
Right, because it was shot on DV. So Sin City, obviously that hasn't happened. Sometimes occasionally we'll get something, but when this came out and when it was successful and when I found it enjoyable, I was thinking about, what would a Batman movie that took this kind of visual approach be? Like, what, could you have a live action person with a fully stylistically, digitally animated cape and cowl? Like, what could you do for all of this kind of stuff? And in that regard, I still really respect Sin City so much for what it did and what it was able to accomplish. And I still enjoyed quite a bit of it. But I think after this most recent rewatch, it would be like, well, if I want to watch Sin City, maybe I'll watch the opening bit and the hard goodbye. And that's all I really need. I get the Sin City fix. Even though there are things in the other two larger stories that I enjoyed, I think it runs its course in the best of ways with that story. And, you know, we won't talk about the sequel at all.
No.
But I definitely, you know, having seen the sequel, I can say it's like, yeah, that it feels like it was a one-time shot. And that's impressive that they were able to do it. They were able to do it to the vision that they wanted to execute, that it came out as good as it did. I'm still impressed by that. And it's still a movie I would recommend to people, to say it's like, if you don't know that this is based on a comic book and you just saw it, I'd love to kind of hear the reactions to that. But if you know that it's a comic, it's like, I would recommend it from a place of, see, there are things we can do with adapting the visuals of comics that we aren't taking full advantage of, and Sin City did 15 years ago.
Right. I mean, look at Into the Spider-Verse and what it's been able to do with comic book stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is this amazing potential with computer graphics now, especially. Oh my God, in the past 15 years, with how far they've come, they could do anything. And if they were able to do something as singular as Sin City, something that was so visually interesting that you saw it in everything for a little while there, like advertising and stuff especially, was the black and white with the single color thing.
Oh, yeah.
I actually worked at a Glamour Shots, and we had people coming in and requesting that. They'd be like, can you do all black and white, but my lips are red? And I'm like, sure.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's so much potential to do that with other stories. I think that a few other comic book movies have kind of caught that. I think like a Scott Pilgrim versus the World is close because it doesn't feel like the real world, but even that, to a degree, I'm kind of like, no, it's still a real setting. Whereas Sin City is so purely digital, it's so fantastic that it's almost an animated film. And I think that's a really interesting avenue to take for comic books, and I really wish they would.
Well, I would say if we have something that might compare to Sin City, we would go to the shelf, where we pick a movie that might act as a good follow-up or replacement for our main topic. And as always, we want to recommend you loyal listeners go to genrevision.com and comment on the post for this episode with your own shelf picks. Dani, what are you going to pull off the shelf for Sin City?
I'm going to get so much hate because when I looked this up to get the year, it's got a 6% on Rotten Tomatoes. So I recommend Cool World from 1991.
Okay.
Which is it's
I mean, you're not wrong. There's a thematic through line you can draw between Sin City and Cool World.
Yes, both are comic book or comic book adjacent. Cool World is about an artist who creates this world, Cool World, this imaginary place, and he draws all these characters, and come to find out that there's actually a place where cartoons are alive. It's sort of like the really adult Who Framed Roger Rabbit, but it's PG-13, so it's not that adult.
Mm-hmm.
And
there's a weird, I mean,
it's so weird, and Brad Pitt's in it, baby bat Brad Pitt.
Yeah, I've watched that movie quite a few times in my life, and it's never really stuck except for a few of the animated bits. Because like Brad Pitt's a detective, so there is like and
he totally has a noir style way of talking, and especially when he's talking to the Toons. because his girlfriend is sort of like she's like a Jessica Rabbit-esque type, but she's not quite as sexy because she has the dark hair, and then there's the blonde, the Kim Basinger character, and she's Hollywood, and Miss Hollywood is sort of, she reminds me of the LA Confidential character Basinger also played. She really taps into that vampy noirish thing very well, and I don't know. I just feel like, and also, you know, from a filmmaking standpoint, this is something where they were trying out a new technique, you know, not new because Who Framed Roger Rabbit came before, but it is something that, you know, had not been done a whole bunch. And this was the first time it was done with a more adult story, because PG-13 was still, you know, kind of a death knell to family entertainment back then. You know, people weren't taking their kids to PG-13 willy-nilly in 91 as much as they are now. At least my family wasn't. And I don't know, it's just, Cool World is one of those things, it's of its time. It's such an interesting translation of concepts of a certain type of cartooning and a certain kind of edge that was really present, I think, in especially 80s cartooning. There's something that it just captures there, and Bakshi's work in particular, that I just think really makes it an interesting watch with Sin City.
Yeah, I might have to give it another watch and see where I am with now. But for my shelf pick, you actually mentioned it earlier. I'm recommending Dick Tracy.
I thought about doing that, and I was like, no, I got to go deeper.
Well, because here, I mean, Dick Tracy is a pretty obvious one. Obviously, this is much more family friendly, but this certainly feels like the one-celled organism that eventually evolved into what Sin City is. Obviously, Dick Tracy, the comics seem very much like ground zero for the type of thing Frank Miller was doing with Sin City.
Absolutely.
That it is these extremely exaggerated features on both the heroes and villains. And Dick Tracy is a movie that I'm deeply fascinated by, even though I can't say it's really that good.
That's kind of how I feel about Cool World too. So we're in the same boat.
Yeah, because Dick Tracy, it was this whole thing of after Tim Burton's Batman became the biggest movie ever in 1989, instead of making all these superhero movies, everybody scooped up the rights to these weird, darker, pulpy things like The Phantom and The Shadow.
Oh my God, I saw like all of those in the theater.
Oh, me too. And Dick Tracy came out the next year after Batman, and it was really promoted as like, this is the next Batman, and it had a big star in Warren Beatty, who was also directing it. Madonna is Breathless Mahoney, Al Pacino. I mean, again, it had like a real star-studded cast. It's just a really kind of weak story as a movie. Like, I think the performances are really fun. I love, again, the extreme design to the world. You know, the world just takes place in the city, and it's this very specific kind of Saturday morning cartoon version of a weird 30s world that never really existed.
Yeah, it's kind of got that same, like, it's sort of like the 94 Judge Dredd movie, where it's just this balls to the wall, like, we're gonna take the cartoon aesthetic and run with it in live action as hard as we can.
Yeah, it's purposefully garish.
Oh, it's so ugly.
But I mean, like, intentionally, by design. Yeah, which I think is so interesting and kind of alluring to me. I like when things are just so abrasive in their DNA. So yeah, Dick Tracy feels like, you know, you need to see it to kind of better understand Sin City's trying to be the... If Dick Tracy's like the 7-year-old version of this world, Sin City's like the 16-year-old Edge Boy version of this world,
and Cool World is like the 13-year-old version.
Yeah. So it's a perfect progression. But I do have to mention our listener shelf picks from last week's episode on The Boxer's Omen, our first entry in our Global Gonzo series, and of course we had some wonderful Gonzo recommendations from listeners. Ryan Covey suggested a movie called Devil's Express, which I highly recommend everybody go to genrevision.com and click on the post for Boxer's Omen and watch the little TV ad that Ryan Covey put in the in the comments. He explains the movie, which sounds fascinating too, but that little ad was wonderful. Mr. Milksteak recommended The Great Yokai War, which is a Takashi Miike movie.
Yes, I actually totally am on board with that.
I haven't seen it, but there are some other yokai monster movies that we have on our list for Global Gonzo that they were making. There's like a trilogy of movies, I think, from the late 60s of these bizarro yokai monsters, which I'm deeply interested in.
Great Yokai War was Takashi Miike trying to make a kids movie, and it's still PG-13, and you see Muppets get dismembered, so it's worth checking out for sure.
It's still a Takashi Miike movie.
It's still freaking wild, and you get to see Chiaki Kiriyama as like this beehive-headed villain. She's nutty. I love it.
And then finally, Eric Fuchs, in my opinion, won the week with the shelf pick I should have made, which is Extra, which is absolutely one of the must-see, craziest movies of all time. I've seen it a number of times, and I actually got the Blu-ray that was released a year or so ago. And it was one of the movies I had the benefit of seeing at the New Beverly Cinema with an audience. And I had seen it before, and whenever they do these kind of crazy movies, they ask, show of hands, who hasn't seen this before? And tons of people hadn't seen Extra, and I was like, oh, this is going to be awesome. Like, just listening to everybody react to a movie where a woman gives birth to a full-grown man.
I've never seen it, so we'll have to do like a Skype viewing one day.
oh my God, it will melt your brain. It's so good. So yeah, thank you as always for all the shelf picks, everybody, and I'm looking forward to the shelf picks for this week's episode. Let's do some currently consuming.
Nom 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 nom.
Danny, what's been on your plate?
So I checked out this show on HBO that I'd actually put off because the advertising for it was freaking obnoxious, and I didn't want to watch it because I'd seen the ads so many times. Thanks, HBO. This is the second show you've done that to me with. The first was Insecure.
Oh, yeah.
But I have been watching Euphoria. I've only watched the first 6 episodes, so, take this with a slight grain of salt that I really do like it. It's so different from any other teenage drama I've seen. It is very, very dark. Like, there was a lot of press when this first came out about how graphic some of the scenes are, and the end of every episode has a, little, if you or someone is in trouble, call the hotline. And I mean, it's a lot. But at the same time, it sort of scratches that like Dawson's Creek melodrama itch in a way that I needed, while also being so incredibly made. Like this is shot, the cinematography is out of this freaking world.
Okay.
I actually described it as Spring Breakers if it was made competently.
Okay, I don't know. I know.
No shade to Harmony Korine, but
our friend Travis is quite the fan of Spring Breakers.
I love Spring Breakers. I'm not like that's. I guess Spring Breakers to me is just so all over the place and disjointed, and Euphoria is like Spring Breakers if the plot actually mattered.
Okay,
that's a better description.
Yeah, I have no bearing on the show other than the aggressive ad push that HBO made for it, which really turned me off of it because it was just like, I don't care.
Yeah, it was before I think Westworld, and it was obnoxious. It was like same with Insecure. I was just like, I would have watched this, but now I don't want to. And I finally gave it a chance because I had enough people that I respected their opinions online were like, no, you should probably check this out. Somebody described it as Nicholas Winding Refn's Freaking Geeks, and I was like, all right, I'm in. But Zendaya's performance is just absolutely incredible. She should be winning awards for this.
Okay, yeah, I've liked her so far in what I've seen her in.
She is incredible in this, and it's a very difficult performance because her character is ultimately kind of unlikable in a lot of ways, and a lot of the characters in this get to be unlikable, but not in a Lena Dunham girls privileged kind of way, but more like, hey, this is who we are, we're surviving. And she's a recovering drug addict, and she's 17. She's still in high school. Her best friend is a transgender girl who's actually played by a transgender actress, which is nice and refreshing. It's really good. It's based on an Israeli TV show of the same name. I don't know a whole lot behind the making of it other than Drake is attached, and I don't like Drake, but the show itself has been really, really good so far. And if you're into sort of psychedelic, mind-trippy stories about people figuring out who they are and what they will do when put in crazy situations, then it's worth checking out.
Well, on my end, I also engaged with something that I thought I would have zero interest in. I played the Final Fantasy VII Remake demo, and for the longest, I mean, because this game feels like it's been coming out for a decade. For the longest time, I was like, I have no interest in that. I think it's, what's his name? It's like Tetsuya Nomura, who I think is the Kingdom Hearts guy, is pretty much doing his thing with Final Fantasy VII. And to be real for a second, I enjoy Final Fantasy VII. It was certainly a seminal game and an important game for me, but it's not even my favorite Final Fantasy from that generation.
Right.
I like Final Fantasy IX and Final Fantasy Tactics more.
Yeah, I was a tactics person, so.
Yeah, so but obviously 7 is incredibly memorable and important and has ingrained itself into pop culture in a way that a lot of the other entries haven't. And so I replayed 7 in the last year and was like, yeah, this is good, but it's still my least favorite. Well, I don't know. I have to replay 8 because I know they just put out a remastered version of that. Because I know that's kind of the black sheep of that whole generation. Not a fan of 8. Yeah, I had it. I owned it.
There's some good characters in it, but it's not.
The system is very different. Yeah. It's in the whole like card thing. I don't know, chaining.
Yeah, it didn't work for me because like I don't really dig turn-based, so that was kind of hard.
Okay.
And the closer it hewed to like Super Mario RPG, the better off I was.
Sure. Well, I mean, yeah, I love turn-based RPG stuff, and that's why, you know, even Kingdom Hearts I got away from and seeing it's like, okay, they're just going to do the action fighter thing with Final Fantasy VII. But they put out a demo and I was like, well, it's a demo, it's free, I'll check it out. And I found myself pleasantly surprised. I will admit part of that is banking on the pure nostalgia they're banking on. Like, hey, we have new orchestrations of all the original music. And I'm like, oh, I love that music. I love all of, oh my gosh, I'm blanking on the composer's name, which is terrible. Nobuo Uematsu. I love all of his music. His Final Fantasy IX score is like my favorite thing, like in video game music. But, you know, I hear that music and it's new orchestrations and new variations and stuff on it. I'm like, okay, that's hitting that center of my brain. And then I really liked that they pretty much put in a mode that caters to old farts like me, which is that you can set it on what they call classic mode, where all of the action attacking stuff will be done automatically. And you can focus on the command system that is built up in your, what is it, like active time bar or whatever. And it's like, oh, okay, so I can just sit here and they'll do all the fighting stuff. And then when I get a command to cast a spell or use an item or something, that's like old Final Fantasy to me. Okay, I could do that. So I played it through twice, once with the classic mode on and then without it. And was like, I kind of like this. It's not bad.
Yeah. Britain's he likes Final Fantasy, probably about the same amount you do. He likes Final Fantasy VII, but isn't like, oh my God, Sephiroth. Yeah. You know, like some folks, which is fine. I get it. He has really pretty hair, but
sure.
That's my takeaway as someone who has only seen the movie.
Okay. Yeah. Well, and yeah, I mean, that's the thing too, is like, it's like, yes, I recognize all these characters and how much people love them. And it's cool to see them in an updated form. And now, you know, you can't name everybody whatever names you want, and they have voice actors and stuff, and it's like, okay, this is okay.
You mean I can't
like,
name Tifa Tits? I'm
right,
out.
right. Well, I mean, well, it's like my thing was always I was vainglorious and would, every lead character was named Drew, and then all of my party were always like, who are my friends at the time?
That's so sweet. Like I've always been the person that names everything like the dirtiest thing I can think of, or just the most vulgar, stupid thing, just because.
Right.
Then when the dialogue pops up and it's like, "Hey, Butts, how you doing?" And I'm like,
right,
"This is perfect."
Some big dramatic moment.
Butts is my favorite. Most video games, I'm Butts.
That's a really good one. But yeah, but I enjoyed the demo way more than I thought I would. It won't be a day one purchase for me because nothing is, with a rare exception these days.
Animal Crossing.
But I just waited out because I'm like, I'll see the critical response, the immediate critical response. I never trust on anything with video games.
Oh God, no.
I really
movies
wait
either.
Well, especially with like big titles, like AAA big title stuff, I almost always wait a year or more to play it because I'm like, I want to see how this sticks around.
Well, and I always give them time for updates too, because some of these games come out and they are not finished, and they're like, "Oh, right, it's done," and I'm like, "No, that needs patches."
Sure, that's another thing about the industry that it's part of the reason I've gotten away from a lot of big modern gaming releases. Like I just played the new God of War for the first time this year. I loved it. It was great.
It's absolutely great. But yeah, it took me a while to play that too. Yeah, I pretty much only play indie stuff, and I play a lot of stuff that's in development indie stuff because the developers tell you. They're like, this is exactly where we're at. This is what you're getting. This is what you can expect. And I'm like, oh, I like that a lot more than the big corporations who are like, here's a finished game, pay $70 for it, but in 3 months, we're going to need you to pay to $60 for the update that fixes everything.
Right, and then, they'll piecemeal. So, I mean, I will say that I'm glad that a lot of the kind of live service approach to gaming is starting to, it's an unsustainable model. So we have things like, from what I know, and this is part of the reason I'm avoiding buying it, for a year or so, is that when Final Fantasy VII Remake comes out, you'll get the full game. Like it's not going to be like, oh, and now there's going to be a DLC thing that now you can go do this thing that you could do originally in the original game. That's right. Again, that's part of the reason why I love the new God of War. It's like, oh, it's a finished experience.
Right. Like the new Tomb Raider games have been like that for me. Like I felt like they're complete stories, and any DLC that's come out has just been like, oh, this is just more goodness. Like that kind of DLC doesn't bother me. Or like content DLC where it's like, oh, you want extra costumes? You want some extra little shinies? All right, fine, whatever. But if it's something that is like part of what the game should be, that's infuriating. And that's something that you're seeing more and more and more. And there's some game companies where it's like, oh yeah, the base game is $15, but if you don't buy $90 worth of DLC, it's not worth playing.
Well, yeah, that's a larger discussion certainly to be had about video games, and part of the reason why I just am not as tapped into them anymore. But yeah, Final Fantasy VII Remake, if it's as enjoyable as the demo that I played, and when it comes out, it's like that's the whole game. You don't have to. There aren't going to be like special objects that you can only get by purchasing them. If you can unlock them in the game.
Wait, there's no loot boxes? What?
Right. If there's all that kind of stuff. Well, because at the end of the demo, they're like, hey, you can pre-order the game, and there's like a regular version or a special version, and they had like a couple items, like a couple magic items, where it's like, oh, you'll get this in the premium edition. I'm like, if that's the game you guys play, and there's only things that you can get, immediately by purchasing them, and then a year or two later when you put out the Game of the Year edition and you can buy it, and then it comes with all that shit you piecemealed, I just can't support that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, they've had those kind of things. As long as it's stuff that's not, again, if it's not integral to the game, if it's like costumes or whatever, if it's stuff that just makes the game a little bit extra fun, I don't have as much of a problem with it as I do if it's something that's like, oh, well, this is something that would make the game much more easy, or this is something that would make the game more enjoyable as a whole. If it's something little, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, we'll see. But I'm as somebody who had written off that Final Fantasy VII remake, because that's been like teased since before the PlayStation 3 came out.
Yeah.
Where they released like a tech demo of an updated Final Fantasy VII, and everybody's like, "Oh, they're gonna do a new version of Final Fantasy." That's how long I felt this tease has been going on.
Like not quite as long as Half-Life 3, but almost.
Sure.
Or as long as New Mutants. That's how long it feels.
Yeah. But yeah. So with Final Fantasy VII remake, we'll see. I'm gonna wait on it, but I enjoyed the short time I spent. Like I said, I played the demo through twice, which was. That should be a selling point in of itself. But we're going to close things out with our
comment of the week.
And this comment comes from our wonderful loyal listener, T-Bones McRoanoke, about the Boxer's Omen. I loved his response to this. He just says, "Guys, what is this movie? The more you talked, I could not even begin to comprehend what would follow. The closest thing to a shelf pick would be a fever dream I had in the hospital when I had meningitis in high school." Which might be the greatest shelf pick we've ever received. Thank you so much, T-Bones McRoanoke. Yeah, I thoroughly encourage everyone out there to seek out the Boxer's Omen by any means necessary you can see it, because it is an absolute trip, and we had so much fun talking about it. It's one of my favorite episodes that we've done this year. And we hope you'll all be back for more of our Global Gonzo entries, because I really think that's going to be a fun time.
Yeah, those Global Gonzo entries are going to be great. Like, y'all, I know I have some inside information, and y'all definitely want to stay tuned.
Yes, Danny has had a peek into the list that we have going and has even added potential entries to it. So, yeah, it's going to be a real fun time. And once again, thank you so much, Danny, for joining me this week. It was a blast. It's always fun to talk to you.
Oh, of course, anytime, especially if it's about, weird comic book movies that aren't Marvel or DC.
Sure. But we will be back, Travis and I, next week, and we're going to be tackling a movie that Travis has been attempting to get on the podcast for a long time, and it's finally happening. We're going to talk the Super Mario Brothers movie.
Yes.
Which I'm extremely interested, because Travis has told me he believes he has a take on the movie that he's not seen anybody else put out there. So I cannot wait to hear his take on this truly bizarre relic of a movie. So we'll be back next week with that. As always, thank you all so much for listening, and we'll see you next week right here on Genre Vision.
Wash your hands. Bye.